Pakistan today is probably at its most interesting stage. As you know, we've always led interesting lives in Pakistan, but this particular stage is more interesting than ever. In some ways, it's the best of times, and in a lot of ways, it's the worst of times. First, the worst of times, the biggest problem now the country faces is that terrorism threatens the existence of the country. We started off fighting the U.S. war on terror, which was basically to protect American lives for what had happened in 9/11. And now it's ended up not for Pakistanis, it's more a concern of will terrorism destroy our own country? Because in the last year, there was a quantum leap in the amount of terrorism. And the terrorists now, no one is unsafe. The security forces need protection. They're bombing right in the capital, in suicide bombings against the ISI. Suicide bombers walk into a commando base and blow up 50 commandos. So no one feels safe right now, especially after the assassination of Benazir. Just before I came, I read this statement from the Interior Ministry that all political leaders must look after their own security. So that was reassuring that the government had finally decided that the way they protected Benazir, they think that we need to protect ourselves a lot more. But the problem now is that the way this war on terror is being fought, it's only increasing terrorism. In my opinion, it is the most senseless way we walked into this war on terror. I do believe that had there been a democratic government, the decision-making, the democratic governments too would have wanted to help U.S. in the war on terror. But the way we would have gone about, if there was better decision-making through debate, discussions, parliament, consensus building, politicians would have dealt with this much better. Because politicians believe in dialogue, talking, convincing, whereas generals believe in bombing. If they are weak, bomb them. If they are strong, retreat. So because of this situation we were in on 9/11, we have now got into a serious mess. There is in Waziristan now a full-scale tribal uprising, not to be confused with terrorism related to Al-Qaeda or Taliban. They call themselves Taliban, but this is not religious Taliban. These are political Taliban. There was no Talibanization in the whole of tribal area when Taliban were in power in Afghanistan. This is in reaction to the way the Pakistan army entered Waziristan and what they call collateral damage, where women and children were being bombed in villages which died in looking for terrorists. And so in reaction, the people of Waziristan now are basically fighting the Pakistan army. Even those who are not fighting resent the Pakistan army. Their sympathies are with the other side, not because they are Taliban or Al-Qaeda, but it's because they oppose the Pakistan army. In Swat now also there's a military operation. Now Swat has nothing again to do with Al-Qaeda or Taliban. It was basically a movement which started for justice. Because just for those of you who don't know anything about Swat, Swat was till 1969 under a semi-autonomous part of Pakistan. And it was run under the tribal system. And the tribal system, contrary to what I read sometimes, statements coming from officials in the U.S., the tribal system is not lawless. They say the lawless part of Pakistan. It actually has complete rule of law. the British governor of Northwest Frontier Province, Olaf Caro, who's written one of the best books on the Pashtuns, in 1935 he says that a week's crime in Peshawar was more than a year's crime in the whole of the tribal area, because they have the system of complete decentralized democracy. Every village has its own parliament called the Jirga, and every village also has its own jury. That same Jirga acts as a jury, so people have access to justice, cheap, at no cost, quick justice. And because of that, there's rule of law. So when Swat became part of Pakistan, it then had the Pakistani laws applying, and so the Jirgas vanished and they had the session courts. When they had the session courts, the people needed lawyers. Now, majority of the people in Pakistan still cannot afford lawyers. So they went outside the pale of justice. And might is right began to gradually, as the governance system began to collapse, might is right prevailed. The powerful could afford lawyers, would basically become above law, and the common people gradually were deprived of justice. So a movement started in Swat called the Movement for Shariat. Now, Shariat for them meant justice. And that movement should have been tackled differently. But the political governments in 90s, when it started, did treat it differently. They didn't send the army. They sorted the issue out. They basically just made some window dressing to the court system, and people were pacified. Musharraf, of course, has sent the Pakistan Army. And since the army operation has started, they again now are calling themselves the Taliban there. So then there is Balochistan, where again the army was sent, and Nawab Akbar Bukti was assassinated. An 80-year-old man was killed by helicopter gunships. So in that area too, there's now people fighting against the Pakistan Army. Then there was the Lal Masjid affair. Now, Lal Masjid was portrayed here as there was some big battle between Al-Qaeda mixed with Taliban terrorists. They were fundamentalists. Fundamentalists should not be confused with militant extremists. Fundamentalism exists everywhere. You have it in U.S. In every country you have fundamentalists, people who feel threatened that their religion is going to be swamped by, in Pakistan, Western culture. And in India, you have fundamentalists who sort of attack cinemas and so on. So to tackle fundamentalism is, again, a completely different way. Karen Armstrong has written this excellent research book called Battle for God. And in that, she has mentioned various fundamentalist movements. The moment they were suppressed, they turned violent. And the Lal Masjid was also one of the most tragic cases. If the real details ever came through, it's one of the most shameful massacres that was committed. There were women and children, people who studied in this madrasa. The state is responsible for not giving them proper education. These people don't get proper education because the state school structure has collapsed. Just to give you an idea, in my constituency, I did a research, and I found 70% of government schools closed. 70%. So where are common people supposed to send their children? So madrasas act as a sort of welfare. They give free education. Obviously not education which will take people into the 21st century, but that is poor parents send their children to get any form of education. And so here were these people in this madrasa where these women and these children, orphans, from the poorest strata of the society. And this whole drama started right 200 yards from the ISI headquarters. And this was made into this huge thing, and eventually the army did a full operation and killed anything between 1,200 to 1,400 people in this madrasa, bombed it. A week later, when people went, they sealed it off. They sealed the whole area off for a week, hosed it down, tried to clear all the evidence. A week later, when people went to the mosque, which was neighboring mosque for their prayers, they found little hands there. So, I mean, that's the sort of shameful act done just to prove that General Musharraf was the man to fight extremism. Now, as a result of all this, all these various movements are morphing. All of them are now identifying with Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and that is the threat to Pakistan. We are heading into a never-ending war. It's no point in each time when there is a suicide bombing, Musharraf comes on TV and says, we are still determined to fight terrorism. Because what else is he going to do now? It's increasing. Last year was the worst year of suicide bombings. Over 50 suicide bombings took place. Before 9/11, there's never been a suicide bombing in Pakistan's history. So this is one of the problems which Pakistan faces. And unless a different strategy is acquired, we are going to be in serious trouble, because it threatens now, as I said, the existence of the country. Because who's going to invest in a country where, and the uncertainty, unpredictability, it's obviously already having an impact on the economy. And the other problem, of course, we face is this critical situation where our Supreme Court Chief Justices are under house arrest. 60% of the Superior Court judges have been dismissed unconstitutionally. And General Musharraf has appointed his own judges. And his own judges, this is after staging a coup against his own government, and his own judges have given him the right to amend the Constitution. And he has made 47 amendments to the Constitution, which basically what he's done is he's changed the character of the parliamentary democracy in Pakistan. In parliamentary democracy, the Prime Minister is the chief executive. He has made himself the president, the chief executive. And it was a bizarre way he did it. Him being the army chief and the president, he kept giving, the army chief would give powers to the president would give powers to the army chief, and he's acquired all the powers now, even though he's left the office of the army chief. The situation now is that he's going to hold elections on the 18th of Feb. Now, if he gets away with these elections, and the chances are 50-50, but if he gets away, then we are doomed to another phase of dictatorship. And I do not think Pakistan is in a position to now sustain 5 more years of Musharraf, because there are serious problems come apart from the terrorism. The economy is in a mess. We have an energy crisis. We have trade deficit, fiscal deficit, wheat deficit. There's a feeling amongst the bottom 50% of the people are completely crushed. Prices have gone up 3 times in 8 years. And so that's one the economic crisis. Then there's a crisis of the federation. All 3 smaller provinces now in the frontier provinces, there's great anger against Punjab because of what's happening in the tribal areas in Swat. In Balochistan, in the Baloch areas, there's a movement going for independence after Nawab Akbar Bukhti's death. In Sindh, there is great anger because Musharraf, in order to stay in power, his allies, MQM, has only 13% of the vote bank. They have 50% of the ministries in Sindh, and they have total control of Karachi. So the interior, the Sindhis, there is tremendous discontent there, as you notice when, after Benazir's assassination, there were riots. And there was this great anger which came out in Sindh. So this also is the situation in Sindh is could go anywhere if 18th February results, the election results, don't go the way people expect, which they think they should, because according to the polls, the vast majority of people, 75% before Benazir's assassination, it's gone even worse now, 75% of the people want Musharraf to go. Amongst all these crises is now the fear that where are we heading? And sadly, the political parties who should have been standing up to a military dictator, the political parties, unfortunately, have done the worst compromises with him. And actually, each time, the civil society, the lawyers, the media has stood up to the dictator, the political parties have bailed him out. And Now the hope in Pakistan, which is why is it in a way the best of times. The reason why it's the best of times is that Pakistan has gone through a soft revolution. And this was primarily because of the independent television channels. The level of political awareness raised by these channels has been unprecedented. People today understand issues better than ever in our history. People understand what's going on in Pakistan. And this was, again, because of the current affair programs, which was so widely watched in Pakistan. The ratings were far, far above any soap opera. And these current affair program hosts became heroes in the country. So on November 3, Musharraf not only destroyed the judiciary, but he also clamped down on the media. And even today, the popular programs, the current affair programs, are not allowed on air. And also, there's such censorship on television that when I went on TV just before I came over, so the host politely sat down before me and said, "You cannot mention three things. Forget about criticizing. You cannot mention three things. You cannot mention General Musharraf. You cannot mention the army. And you cannot mention the PCO judges, the judges who've taken oath on Musharraf." So I said, what else do I talk about? But this is the fare of that. This in itself reflects the change brought in by the independent TV channels. And as a result of this change, the 9th March events unfolded. When he dismissed the Chief Justice, no one expected any reaction. Musharraf didn't expect any reaction because he simply called him up, sat in uniform, the picture appeared in the newspaper, and he told him that you have to resign. And so he didn't. And then when he refused to resign, the intelligence chiefs, 3 generals, then interrogated him and tried to blackmail him, to force him to resign. He still didn't resign. Then as he was going, the police then manhandled him and then took him to his house and put him under house arrest. And so he thought it was only a matter of time before, he will just appoint the new Chief Justice. And he already had appointed the new Chief Justice. And then the reaction started. And the series of miscalculations made by Musharraf after 9th of March was simply because he hadn't realized that the country had changed. The way the people stood behind a Chief Justice shocked even people like us. We were sort of surprised at the reaction that started coming. And the government then played for time. It thought it's only a matter of time before, the weather was getting hot. Soon these people will start demonstrating outside the Supreme Court. And they thought the demonstrations would just peter out. Rather than petering out, the demonstrations started increasing. More and more people began to participate. And then the sort of turning point was on 9th of May, when the Chief Justice decided to go from Islamabad to address the Lahore High Court bar. He did this trip on the road. And what happened during that trip shocked everyone. I was waiting for him to receive him in Lahore, and we were expecting him at 6 in the evening. He arrived at 8 in the morning. And all night there were people waiting for the Chief Justice, and ordinary people. So I think that shook the regime. So when he was going to go to Karachi on the 12th of May, they planned the most awful piece of state terrorism ever witnessed. Right on television, you saw as the Chief Justice lands in Karachi, openly, MQM, the affiliated party with the Chief Justice, you could see it on television with flags. They started to scare away the crowds. They started just shooting into people, into peaceful rallies. They killed 50 people. 200 had bullet wounds. And Musharraf openly proclaimed that the power of the people was shown. And so when there was an uproar, which took again everyone by surprise because people watched it on television, you couldn't deny it, The MQM government tried to deny it, that no, it wasn't us, but people saw it on TV. There was one TV channel that wouldn't, because it would not listen to MQM and turn off the transmission, for 6 hours they were under fire, and they were still filming when the bullets were flying into their studios. So that again backfired. And then so sort of the series of mistakes and then the public pressure, eventually he had to reinstate the Chief Justice. He was left with no choice. But this reflects the change in Pakistan. Again, then the fact that he had to resort to a coup against his own government on November 3 was because he realized that there was no way the judiciary was going to play ball with him. They would not allow a commander-in-chief in uniform to contest the presidential election. And so since he realized that the judiciary would stand with the Constitution, then this emergency was imposed, again hitting the judiciary and the media. Now, why do I think that this is the best of times? Because my party came into being. We started 11 years ago calling ourselves Movement for Justice, asking for an independent judiciary. Because we felt you can't have democracy or prosperity until you have rule of law. You can't have rule of law until you have a judiciary that acts as a check and balance. People like us were inspired, of course, when we first came to university in the Western countries. We were inspired by the US system of check and balances. And that's why it is such a shock that the State Department keeps talking about free and fair elections. They keep talking about getting rid of the emergency, and they want democracy. They do not talk about the reinstatement of the judges. Because if you don't have reinstatement of the judges, how are you going to have free and fair elections? Who decides? Musharraf every day gives a statement that there will be free and fair elections because he says there will be free and fair elections. But you need, unless you have independent judiciary, how can anyone have any faith in the electoral process? So therefore, this is where now the whole battle lines are drawn. This is where now the future of the country is going to be decided. If the Chief Justice and the judges get reinstated, and according to the polls, 75% of the people are still standing behind the Chief Justice, want him back. If he gets reinstated, if the Supreme Court gets reinstated and the Superior Court judges, we then, for the first time in our history, move towards a genuine democratic system. If Musharraf manages to get rid of the real judges of Pakistan, manages to get his own judges established in the country, then we head towards a period of turmoil and really some dark stages in our history are going to be observed in the coming months, because I think that there will be the elections which we all, the political parties, think will witness the mother of all rigging. Because how does a man who has less than 5% of the people behind him, how is his party going to win the election now without the most ingenious rigging of all times? So these are now the battle lines. But here again now, I have to say with a lot of regret that that section of Pakistan is trying to bail out Musharraf, who should be really standing up for the democratic process, and those are the political parties. Except of all the politicals, the coalition I'm in has boycotted the election, saying that unless you reinstate the judges, these elections are meaningless. Nawaz Sharif or the PMLN was with us, one of the biggest parties, probably with the biggest vote bank. But unfortunately, they've decided to fight the elections because People's Party wanted to fight the elections. And the interesting thing is that of all the major parties that are contesting the elections, except for PMLN, no other political party is demanding the reinstatement of the judges. So the line in Pakistan, the divide in Pakistan, is not liberal and extremist. It is status quo and anti-status quo. It's those people who want change and a genuine democracy, and those people who want the same system to prevail in which they have prospered. Crooks and military dictators cannot afford to have an independent justice system. Hence, we are seeing this sign that this awful situation where parties that are calling themselves democratic are not only going along with Musharraf in this fraudulent election, in an held under the unconstitutional PCO, the Provisional Constitutional Order, but they're also helping to restore the status quo. So that's where the battle lines are. And fortunately, the people of Pakistan are all standing with the judges, the students, the civil society, the opinion makers, the columnists, and above all, the heroic struggle of the lawyers of Pakistan. Something never seen probably anywhere, that lawyers going out in the street, the work that should have been done by political parties, you found lawyers going in, getting beaten up, filling the jails, and yet resolute, suffering huge financial losses by boycotting the courts, and yet they are determined that the Chief Justice has to be reinstated. So that's where the hope lies. And this is where the situation in Pakistan is at the moment. So thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Okay. Did you want to stay there? Do you
Yeah, I'll do it from here.
Okay. You don't want to sit by me?
Tempting. I think it'd be easier.
Okay. I know we have a full house and a lot of questions, so let me start here, over by the wall.
Pakistan. So, Imran Khan, you want to give this permission to U.S. military with Pakistan military joint action against northern area. That is, they call there is some extremist and religious going on.
Yeah, I read this report by, I think, is it Gates who said that the U.S. could send its army into the tribal area. It just reflects that they do have no understanding at all about the tribal area. And they haven't read the history, because the British lost the highest number of soldiers in the 200-year occupation or rule of India in Waziristan. The highest number of British troops died in Waziristan, and right up till 1947, the troops were dying. I think I'll just give you a little bit of understanding, because I have been all over the tribal areas. My mother's tribe originally comes from Waziristan, who then invited me there, and so I went there. I have actually written a travel book of the area too. So just to briefly make you understand why this whole thing about the tribal area, which no one here seems to understand. I've met a lot of lawmakers in Washington, and they don't even have a rudimentary understanding of what is going on there. So the tribal areas of Pakistan joined Pakistan in 1948 by signing a treaty with the founder of Pakistan, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And only 44 laws of Pakistan apply in the tribal area. The tribal areas have never been conquered. It's one of the that area of Pakistan, and actually across on the other side of the Durand line in Afghanistan, which has resisted every invader from Alexander downwards. The Mughals, who were a superpower of their time, suffered one of their biggest defeats was against these tribal Pashtuns at Ali Masjid, where 40,000 Mughal army was decimated. Then the Sikhs eventually, when they clashed with the tribal area, eventually their leader Hari Singh was killed in Jamrud, again with the people of tribal area. And the British have left a very detailed account of the 80-year experience with the tribes. And the British actually came to the conclusion that there was no point in trying to fight the people, because in the tribal character or the tribal tradition, revenge is an integral part of the character. That the whole tribal system functions, the powerful are always scared to abuse a weak person, simply because if they fear that if someone gets killed, then their family will have to take revenge. And there are some great, if you read stories about the tribal area, I mean, in some vendettas, something like over a period of 50 years, 200 people have died in these revenge things. So people are very scared. There's a balance of terror there amongst the tribes, that they do not do anything that would incur a blood vendetta. And the other aspect, of course, I've mentioned before, that these areas are completely democratic. The tribes have a completely democratic system of functioning. They do not accept any central authority. There's no such thing as them listening to anyone. The villages all run their own affairs. They have own parliaments. So when the British used to go into the tribal area because they wanted the roads cleared, they were worried about the Russians moving south. So this was where the forward policy was. They would pay subsidies to the tribes to keep the roads open. And if there was an incident where a skirmish took place, which there was always a chance, and if the British felt that they had to punish the tribes, when they used to bomb the villages, a day earlier they would drop leaflets in the village saying, "We are going to come and bomb you tomorrow." So that people would leave the villages, and bombing was just as punishment, and only material damage took place. No human damage took place, because they recognized that if there was what is now called collateral damage, the tribes are going to keep fighting for revenge. And to illustrate the sort of the revenge psyche of the people, in 1947, the last political agent in Waziristan, on the day Pakistan became independent, he was assassinated. He was assassinated by an 18-year-old Pashtun boy. That Pashtun boy was his mother was pregnant at the time with him when his father was killed in a skirmish with the British. That his mother brought him up that he had to avenge his father. And when at 18 he suddenly discovered that Pakistan was getting independence and the British were leaving, he felt he had to take revenge, and so he went and killed this poor guy, the last political agent. So it's that sort of thinking you have to understand, that's why the whole way this war on terror has gone on, they have completely misunderstood the tribal character. They think that by punishing them, and when there's loss of life, it'll act as a deterrent. It's doing the other thing. The Russians in Afghanistan, out of a population of 14 million, I believe at the time, killed 1 million Afghans. Out of 14 million, it was one of the most, no one talks about the casualties these Afghans took. And yet, at the end, there was greater insurgency than it was in the beginning. So it wasn't that after 1 million people died, they had cowed down. Now what is happening, unfortunately, I have to say that Musharraf and some of his generals understand nothing. They haven't even studied the history of the tribal area. Musharraf has never even been to Waziristan. Considering that more Pakistani soldiers have died now in the tribal areas than American soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan put together. Pakistan soldiers are taking a huge battering there. Every day, it's not that one or two soldiers die, 20, 30, 50 die at a time. And that also, there's censorship. They don't allow any journalists in the tribal area so that people would not know the sort of casualties the Pakistan army is taking. And I can tell you this is unsustainable. It's not going to be long before the Pakistan army, there's some reaction within the army where they just refuse to fight. Already, the people, 250 soldiers surrendering at a time. What does that reflect? That they just don't have their heart. They don't understand what this war is all about. The Pashtun element within the Pakistan army especially refuses to fight, especially when there are women and children dying. With this aerial bombing, because the area is so huge and spread out, and it's so rugged that there's no way you can you have to have a huge army to go and occupy that area. 90,000 Pakistani soldiers, they're basically besieged in these forts now. The moment they go out, they lose men. So the way the British evolved to deal with the tribal area was always political settlement. They had this political agent. They evolved this great method of how to deal with the tribes, how to negotiate with them. And military action, if ever, was the ultimate last resort. Now, when Pakistan Army went into Waziristan in 2004, February, Initially, nothing happened. But when the way they started, the first bombings took place, and we don't know whether they were American drones that were bombing them because there was total censorship, or whether the Pakistan army was bombing the villages. But gradually, the whole area began to turn against the army. And so now when Gates talks about sending the American troops, he doesn't realize that they are hunting, 2,000 Al-Qaeda? The tribal belt itself has 1 million armed Pashtuns. Everyone carries arms in the tribal area. Everyone is a sort of natural warrior. They are pushing all these people onto the other side. Surely the way forward was what that General Orakzai, the governor of Frontier Province, who just resigned recently, he's the one who started the peace process with the tribes. It's the only way to go. And because being a tribal Pashtun, he understood this. He was promoting this dialogue and trying to gradually pacify and win over the tribes. But again, I've been reading since I'm back. Again, the army is taking action, and the situation is not going to get any better. There's another agency, which is the Momand agency, which even they've started now attacking the troops. So if the Americans come in my opinion, the whole tribal belt will be on fire. And it's an unwinnable war, and Pakistan will be the main casualty. So I think it's people who are talking about sending the army, the Americans coming into the tribal areas. I don't think they know what they're doing. And I have said this before. It'll be a far bigger disaster than being stuck in Iraq.
Okay, next question. Right there. I'm sorry, could you state your name?
Oh, sure. My name is Aditya. Big fan of yours, by the way. Took your autograph in 1990 in Sharjah. But anyways, I really admire your dedication to democracy, and obviously, me being an American, my cultural heritage, me and my loved ones, we all enjoy the benefits of democracy. However, the pragmatic side of me sees that Pakistan itself has had a bunch of, opportunities with democracy, and it's never actually worked out very well. It's always been pseudo-democracy after pseudo-democracy, and in those periods, Pakistan and the people of Pakistan actually suffered more. Also, the Pakistan army being, the biggest and the most, well-organized institution, have, even during times of democracy and civilian rule, have had their own agenda. And in 1999, just the communication split between Nawaz Sharif and Pakistan, the army under Musharraf, almost resulted in, what could have been, a horrendous, chaotic military scenario, on the border with India. So the question is that even if this whole pursuit of democracy, how would it be different this time? Or how would it be changed so that, the vicious cycle doesn't repeat itself over?
Okay. The fundamental difference is that if this time the judges are reinstated, that's why I'm saying that there's the best hope in Pakistan for democracy is now, because finally we have judges who people trust in, and judges who will derive their power from people of Pakistan rather than GHQ. Until now, the judiciary has been a team player with the executive. Democracy cannot work until you have separation of power, until you have a check on the government. We have never had an independent justice system. That's why our party came into being. Now, if your democracy is not functional, the answer does not lie in a military dictatorship. The answer lies in more democracy. In India, and Pakistan experience of democracy should not be compared to the Middle East or any other Muslim country. It should be compared to India, because we share a similar background. Our founder was a great constitutionalist, believed in democracy. Pakistan came into being through the vote. People voted for Pakistan. So if India, after 40 years of going through a dysfunctional democracy where you had one-party system, suddenly in the last 16 years you are now reaping the fruits of a democracy that started to work, mainly because your great hero, who was the election commissioner, who started people having faith in the electoral process, where people felt that their vote could make a difference. In Pakistan, the problem has been, because we haven't had an independent judiciary, we have not had an independent election commission. So all our elections, except for one in 1970, all the elections have been rigged. And so people have lost faith in the democratic process because they think their vote won't make a difference. Like right now, I can assure you, I can give you in writing, on 18th February would be the lowest turnout in Pakistan's history. Because people already know that the establishment itself is fighting election. The Q League, which Musharraf has, which he has created, the whole state machinery is working to get in its election campaign. And everyone can see it. So when people feel their vote does not make a difference, they don't go out to vote. And in Pakistan, yet the people understand democracy. They understand what democracy is compared to other countries because we have a democratic culture. We have, and this whole these last 3 years with the independent TV, it has made even a bigger change. People understand the issues now much better. And so, in my opinion, military dictatorship, whatever happens, is never the answer. Look, here's someone who was conned by Musharraf for 2.5 years. I supported him. I really thought, someone who could fake sincerity like he does. He's brilliant at that. And I fell for it. And for 2.5 years, we thought, the man was really had got rid of sham democracy and was going to bring genuine democracy, quote unquote. This is what he said. And in the end, I discovered that it's not the fault of generals. It's the institution which they come out of. They just don't have the vision to run a country. They are not equipped to deal with normal human beings. They don't understand debate and consensus and stuff. And so as Churchill once said, war is too serious a business for generals. I really believe that they're not equipped to make these decisions. They should be given, projects, go capture that hill. But when you tell them to run the country, it doesn't work.
Next question. Would you stand up and state your name and affiliation?
Sure. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, Imran bhai. I'm the president of PTI Student Wing of New York. I'm also a musician. I play for a band called Tehreek-e-Insaf. I've been really trying to promote you. I'm also an economics student. I just had a quick question. One is that I've been studying, I read a book written by Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh about the microloans. I know the poor are suffering in Pakistan. Is there any way we can bring microloans, the interest-free banking system, which is also the Islamic banking system, to Pakistan, and can it work over there? Number two.
One question.
Well, congratulations for being in the right political party. Well, forget it. That's one aspect of ending poverty in a country, which is directly empowering the people through microcredit. But in Pakistan, we face, in my opinion, there are 4 emergencies we have to impose in Pakistan. Number 1 is rule of law. It's the most critical thing is to, when you give people rule of law, you liberate them. At the moment, most of Pakistan is stuck in a feudal culture. Feudal culture means the powerful become above law. Feudalism is not, it sort of was originally related to big land holdings, but it actually has now evolved into a culture where the powerful can crush the poor, where the poor are petrified to give a vote to anyone else because of fear of political victimization, because the state does not protect them. So the main thing to liberate the people is, also for democracy, is the rule of law. I remember reading about something with Paddy Ashdown, who was this British politician, was sent to Bosnia to start the democratic process. And after the elections, I remember his quotation. He said, "We failed to bring democracy to Bosnia because before the elections, we did not establish the rule of law." If you don't have rule of law and you hold elections, you just have the powerful come into power. You have the criminals coming into power. Because the criminals know that if they are part of the power structure, the judiciary is not going to do anything to them. So we have, I was 2002 election. I fought in my district against the biggest drug baron there. Because he, and they always go where the establishment tells them to go. So we have this thing of they keep changing parties, which is called, for those of Pakistanis would know, the Lota culture. That they, wherever the power is, that's where they go. And it's because they know that once they are with the power structure, the Pakistan judicial system will do nothing to them. They can't, the judiciary was always a team player. So hence, number one, rule of law. Number two, education emergency. It's the biggest crisis we are facing. Not many people understand this. 100 million Pakistanis below the age of 25. It's a ticking bomb. If we educate them, they become an asset. If we leave them as they are, the country will implode in time to come. So this is and then the worst thing is we have three parallel education systems going. We have English medium for the tiny elite, which then is in most English medium schools alienate them from the rest of the population. Does not equip them to either have political leadership because they can't communicate with the locals. Then you have the Urdu medium school, which is the government school system, which I was very, 9/11 did a report on the madrasas, and the 9/11 report in US came to the conclusion that Pakistan's state school structure had collapsed. So we really need, 1.7% of GDP was spent on education in Pakistan in the enlightened Musharraf years. It's the lowest. It's only 5 countries in the world have spent that percentage of GDP on education. They're all sub-Saharan African states. So you cannot there's no way a country can move forward without education. And it's at an emergency level we have to treat education. Otherwise, I think this is one of the most scary prospects. And number 3 is the economic policy in Pakistan. 90% of taxes are indirect. So the poor subsidize the rich in our country. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And the whole finance raised in Pakistan, the government's revenues are raised 90% indirect taxes, and then overseas Pakistan is sending the remittances. So that's the main foreign exchange earner in the country. So and who sends the remittance? Again, the poor laborers, mostly from Middle East, working 14 hours a day. The blood and sweat money comes to Pakistan, and guess where it's spent? The elite spends it on himself. The palaces, the PM house, billions of rupees. President house, billions of rupees. New GHQ going to be built in Islamabad on the most expensive land, outdoing Pentagon, which is only on 30 acres. So our generals want to show them how we can conquer the world. In 2,500 acres, most expensive land, a GHQ is about to be built in Islamabad. Where you can't, so no education, no health for the poor, no clean drinking water, no housing, but a new GHQ is coming up. And so in my opinion, the whole economic policy must be centered on the bottom 50% of the population. It's the only way we are going to lift the country, rather than a tiny elite which benefits from all the money that has come in since 9/11 has only benefited the elite. And lastly, an employment emergency. There's a massive unemployment problem in Pakistan. So different way in rural areas and different way in urban areas, small and medium industry, empower the little farmer, give him credit, microcredit, but help the small farmer, because when he makes money, like in East Punjab, the great experiment in India where the small farmers were given subsidies, and when he made money, the whole area prospered. So I think the whole, there's a lot to be done, but these are the 4 areas we've really got to concentrate immediately.
This forum is being streamed live on the web, and we're receiving questions from people who are watching online. So this is one of the questions we received. It's a little bit convoluted, but I didn't write it. I'm just reading it. Will you allow your local constituency party branch to elect the candidate for the constituency well in advance, ideally 1 year, instead of deciding by the national level just before the election? This is the only way to stop the rich and the powerful people to get the party nomination at the last minute and they enter parliament.
What that basically means is that, to have parties as institutions, not as family parties. I assure you that if I get killed, my son Suleiman Khan will not become the party chairman. Someone just pointed out that they're absolutely right. The Pakistan democratic process hasn't taken off, namely because we haven't been given enough time. I mean, the moment they make a few mistakes, the army comes back, so that we go back to square one. But actually, what we need in Pakistan are institutionalized political parties, which have elections, which parties select the parties' district organizations elect their or select their own candidates, rather than the King Imran sitting there and people coming and me sort of awarding tickets to anyone. We do believe that eventually this will happen, but I think democracy needs to be given a bit of chance, because if you keep having interruptions, the whole system is not evolving.
Okay, next question, sir. And I just want to remind everyone, given how many people there are and questions we have, let's try to keep it to a one-part question, please.
My name is Manik Mehta from India. Could you comment on relations between India and Pakistan in the current context? And also, how do you see relations developing in the future?
I think the watershed of relationship between people to people, India and Pakistan, the people of Pakistan and people of India, I think was Kargil, the Kargil misadventure, and followed after that when there was a bombing in the parliament in Delhi. I think after that the standoff where two armies faced each other for about 6 months or so. I think after that I noticed a huge change take place, a sort of realization amongst the people in the subcontinent that we cannot solve our problems through military means. And I saw it reflected, by the way, in cricket matches between Pakistan and India. When I used to play cricket against India, losing was not an option. We lost. I remember, we played our first series in India, and we lost. Now the team meeting is going on, very serious team meeting is going on after we've lost the series. And the meeting, the main subject is, how can we sneak into Pakistan in the middle of the night so no one sees us there? Well, when we used to be playing a match against India in Pakistan, it was even worse than playing in India. Because in Pakistan, the fear was that if we lose in Pakistan, we were scared for our lives. And so it was very fortunate in those days. If the team was doing badly, we always had the host umpires to help us. Now, of course, that umbrella has been taken away because you have neutral umpires. But here I was sitting and watching this India-Pakistan match in Lahore, and I never thought I would see these scenes. Pakistan loses to India in Lahore. And guess what happens? I mean, Indian supporters waving flags in the stadium in Lahore and Pakistani spectators cheering them. I thought I had died and I'd gone to another world. I never thought it would happen, but I think this is what it was very obvious that things had changed. People had decided that this was this, and I think a new generation now, this post-partition generation, which did not see the bloodshed of partition and does not harbor that sort of animosity towards the people on the other side. And I feel that it's irreversible. I do not think that we will ever go back to that sort of tension, and although we have extremists both sides who are interested, who get votes by spreading hatred against the other country. But I think the majority of the people, there seems to be a consensus now that if we have our problems, but they will be solved on the table.
I know we have a lot of questions, and if I could just slide one through from myself. Oh, come on, it's a good question. When the emergency was declared and the Chief Justice, along with leaders in the lawyers' movement were put under house arrest. You appeared on CNN after having evaded house arrest or any kind of arrest. Can you tell us what the backstory is on that, how you got away? Is it true you scaled a wall?
Well, I mean, I can't say that it was only a week in prison. But I mean, on November 3, I thought, I knew we were all going to be house arrested. But I was in my house and the police had surrounded my house. And suddenly I get a call from this journalist. He says, look, Imran, a police officer is sitting with me and he's just told me that all the other political leaders are going to be house arrested, but you're going to go into jail. So when he told me that, I realized that, if I went into jail, it was a sort of critical stage. I needed to mobilize my party, and I'd already been working with the students. So I wanted to mobilize the universities, the students, which is always the main force for change. And when you want street movement, students have to be mobilized to be in the forefront. So I decided that if they put me in jail straight away, I would not be able to do anything. So I scaled the wall from, at the back of my house and went into Zaman Park where all my cousins, every house belonged to one of my cousins. So I, went there and then I sort of hid for about 2 weeks. And then I decided that now we had organized things, so I decided to give myself up in this university. And what I didn't realize was that when I went to the university, I walked into a trap. The trap was that the one student organization which controlled the university, that the leadership had been bought off by the chief minister and the governor. And it was swarming with police, plainclothes policemen everywhere. And the leadership of this student union, they had been bought off. And what the plan was, anyway, once they were a little rough. Didn't really beat me up or anything, but they were rough, and they handed me over to the police. So when I got into this police car, this inspector said to me, he said, "Thank God." So I said, "What's the matter?" And he kept going, "Thank God. Shukr hai Allah ka." So I said, what are you talking about? He said, from last night we knew this whole thing, the whole operation has been planned. And we were expecting you to be really take you from here straight to hospital, because the plan was to really have you beaten up with broken bones and stuff. What they thought was that I would have gone to the university with a few people. I went all alone. And the student organization, along with these secret, the police and plainclothes, because they would have resisted when these student organization would have tried to manhandle me, they were planning to beat up my followers and me, and then sort of, teach me a lesson. But I went all alone, and of course the students, when I went there, the whole students gathered around me, so they didn't know what to do. If I was all alone and they had beaten me up, it would have even got worse. Then the international press came by that time. So I was very lucky to get away without my bones being broken.
Thank you for your forceful presentation. My name is Linda Sennett. I'd like you to talk to us a little bit, please, about why you are not going to contest the election. It would seem to me that it would be very valuable for you and your followers to contest it and have open discussion of these issues that you're raising.
We see that elections don't bring democracy. Hosni Mubarak has been holding elections for 27 years. There's Islam Karimov, who's 30 years now. He's just had a 7-year new term. And we've got Robert Mugabe for I don't know how many years. Elections are only meaningful if they are perceived to be free and fair, and if there's if they are independent referees like the Election Commission and the judiciary. Now, in this particular contest, I would have fought elections. I believe that just the election campaign gives you a great opportunity to take issues to the people. But in this case, with your Supreme Court Chief Justice under house arrest, and for the first time the judiciary taking a stand for the rule of law and the Constitution, and then being dismissed because of that, and us politicians then fighting elections under the PCO, which has no legal or constitutional standing, would mean that we would participate in a process if it succeeds, if Musharraf manages to rig, at that time when elections were on the 8th of January, there was no way he was not going to win the election on 8th of January. It's only Benazir's assassination that has put the spanner in the works. And at that stage, if we might have, I think this was the best prepared we were. Our party has a rising vote bank. According to the polls, IRI polls, we are now the second highest vote bank in the frontier province. And in every province, it's rising. So this is the only election we would have fought prepared and in a coalition. But actually to have, for our own success in the election, to have gone in a process that would have abandoned the judiciary. Because if all Musharraf needs to do is get a majority, or his party to get a majority, and that's the end of our judges. Because that means we would have legalized this unconstitutional dismissal of our judges. So we decided to stand with the judges, along with the bar associations, and along with the other parties which are in my coalition.
Next question. Okay.
Hi, my name is Samad Wazir. My name is Samad Wazir, and I am from the tribal areas. I have a question. It seems like you're very dependent on someone who took oath under PCO in 1999, and then when it came to his own interests, said that he's not giving up the position, like Musharraf is not willing to give up. Why are we so dependent on someone who took oath under PCO in 1999 in the first phase?
Well, let me say, in 2000 they took an oath, there was a PCO. But that PCO was not judiciary specific. This PCO, for one, was only, this emergency was to get rid of the judiciary. That was the only purpose of the emergency. Secondly, on November 3, in the afternoon, 7-member bench of Supreme Court had annulled the emergency. So once that emergency had been annulled, the PCO then became unconstitutional. The first PCO was actually endorsed by the Supreme Court afterwards. This PCO has actually, because the Supreme Court annulled the emergency, it has no constitutional standing. So it's a big difference. First, it's judiciary specific, and secondly, it does not have any constitutional standing. And most importantly, it's the first time a Chief Justice said no to the President. The Chief Justice, by the way, after March 9, at any time could have done a deal with Musharraf. He was constantly, the agencies were constantly going to him and saying, let's do a deal, like the deal with People's Party, the power sharing deal. Musharraf was ready to do a deal with him. The Chief Justice never then, he refused to do a deal with him. That's why he did the November 3 emergency. So that's why we are standing with him.
Okay, this question comes from one of our online listeners. As part of your efforts to restore democracy, you have put a great amount of emphasis on a political revival coming from the youth in Pakistan's universities and colleges. In light of the corporate globalization, big business, and as a result of social apathy where even mass anti-globalization movements have little effect on G8 summits, that you assume too much and expect too much from Pakistani youth to bring about some kind of democratization of Pakistan amidst a sense of complacency. What is your sense of the power of these youth?
It's not just the youth I depend on. The lawyers of Pakistan, it's one of the most powerful movements in the country right now, and the lawyers have stood by with the reinstatement of the judges and democracy. Civil society, for the first time, you see English medium educated men and women coming out on the streets. Never happened before. And yes, the students, a very important part of the democratic movement. And not to mention the media, the journalists. The journalists have sort of come out on the streets and taken on the police. It's never happened before. So it's actually an across-the-board movement for democracy in Pakistan.
Okay, this is our last question because we have a hard stop at 10.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Malik Sarwar. The army has failed, we all agree. The major political parties have failed. But the problem is there's no third way. Why don't you, who don't have the votes but have the integrity, Etazaz Ahsan. I know Mushahid Hussain is with the general, but he's a journalist. He's not a Wadera. Why don't you folks get together, some people who are progressive, and form the third way?
I think we are already doing it. And I think if the moment when we have free and fair elections, you might all get a surprise when you see Tehreek-e-Insaf, the party you have correctly chosen. You will suddenly see it emerge. Because the youth in Pakistan, they've done all surveys, and the urban youth in Pakistan, the number one party is now this Tehreek-e-Insaf. And I think once we go into an election campaign with this independent media, whenever there are free and fair elections, I'm very confident that our party might not come into power, but will become a major player in Pakistani politics. Already in the frontier province, I mean, this is in November IRI polls, we are number 2, almost 20% of vote bank in the frontier province. MMA, which had formed the government, its vote bank has fallen down to 5%. So, and if we go in a coalition, which we are planning to do this time, with a lot of the regional parties, it's very important to keep them in the mainstream for the federation. I think we will do well in the elections.
Okay, thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you all for participating.